He awoke to find himself completely alone, inside a dim, echoing cave where a wounded dragon lay before him. The mighty creature was on the verge of death, so as her final act, she wished to bestow upon him a parting gift. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. During that time, our young hero trained without pause. He survived by eating strange, unrecognizable fruits that sprouted within the cave, and with each passing day he grew stronger, faster, and more skilled under the dragon's relentless tutelage. In time, despite his tender age, he surpassed even the most seasoned adult mages in both raw magical strength and comprehension of the arcane arts. Yet the dragon's lessons did not end there. She went further, sealing a fragment of her immense power within his body, ensuring he could call upon it someday in the future, once his body matured and his spirit became strong enough to wield it. But how, one might ask, did such a gifted child end up in a place like this? It's a long, captivating tale, one that must begin from the very start. Most tales we know begin with frail, unlucky souls who perish in despair, only to awaken in a new life as extraordinary beings beyond mortal measure. But this story follows a very different kind of man, a king whose glory was already secured long before his end. The cause of his demise remains wrapped in mystery. Yet after his passing, he opened his eyes once more as an infant, and instead of the opulent royal chamber he expected to see upon rebirth, he found himself inside a modest, humble home. His mother, Alice, was a gentle, compassionate woman, while his father, Reynolds, was a strong and admirable man, though prone to occasional childish antics. The age he was born into was far more primitive than the one he once ruled. After weeks of quietly observing his surroundings, the king concluded that he had already mastered everything this world had to teach. But soon he would discover just how mistaken he was. One day he witnessed his mother conjuring a soft, glowing spell to mend a small injury, one caused, of course, by his father's playful recklessness. It was in that moment the king realized this world held wonders beyond his imagination, and truthfully, he knew absolutely nothing about it. Time flowed steadily onward, and once the reborn king gained the strength to crawl, he began sneaking out of his crib whenever he could. Each escape led him to books, parchments, and scrolls, all in his tireless quest to deepen his understanding of this realm. From that moment on, he ventured out night after night to study in secret. Through these nightly explorations, he learned that the world he now inhabited was divided into 3 grand kingdoms. Elenwar, the realm of elves hidden deep within ancient forests, Darv, the vast subterranean dominion of the dwarves, and Sapan, the sprawling human kingdom most populous of them all. Like his previous world, this land also followed a monarchy. Yet here the throne was inherited, not earned. That alone made it clear to him that this civilization lagged far behind his former one. He soon grasped the reason behind its stagnant progress. From then on, he devoted himself to uncovering the core principles of magic. In his past life, there existed an energy known as Kai, a life force cultivated through grueling discipline to enhance one's body and weaponry. But this new world held something different, a similar essence called mana. Yet unlike Kai, which resided solely within a being, mana flowed freely through the very air that surrounded them. The ability to command mana is mostly inherited. Only about 1 in every 100 children is born with this gift, and its applications are remarkably diverse. The 2 most recognized paths are augmentation and conjuring. Augmenters channel mana into their own bodies, enhancing their strength, endurance, and agility to superhuman levels, yet their limitation lies in their inability to strike from afar. Conjurers, on the other hand, project their mana outward, reshaping the world around them. However, to cast a spell, they must draw on both their internal mana core and the ambient mana in the environment. Curiously enough, his mother is what this world calls a deviant, specifically an emitter. Deviants are rare kinds of mages who possess unusual affinities, and emitters, like his mother, are gifted in channeling restorative mana. From one of the books he's read, he learns that a mage's first awakening usually happens sometime between early adolescence and late teenage years, when their mana core finally manifests. The description reminds him strongly of the Kai Center from his past life. Back then, children were trained to meditate and sense tiny fragments of Kai within their bodies, gathering them into one focal point to form their Kai Center. Intrigued, the young king decides to attempt the same method himself, and to his astonishment, he succeeds on the very first try. Unfortunately, his mother walks in at that exact moment, interrupting him. Before he can make any meaningful progress, time drifts onward, and 2 full years slip by in the blink of an eye. Yet Alice still feels as though she hasn't fully unraveled the mystery that is her little boy. She learns more about him bit by bit, every passing day revealing something new. She's named him Arthur, her most precious treasure, the very light of her life. One afternoon, she catches sight of her husband teaching their tiny son how to swing a stick as if it were a sword, which instantly sends her temper flaring, considering their little warrior can barely crawl. Alice has always loved recording memories, keeping a daily journal of their family life. And even moments like these never fail to bring a smile to her face later on. She's also noticed how much Arthur enjoys tagging along to the small merchant strip in central Ashburn. So instead of her usual weekly grocery trips, she started going downtown nearly every other day. Of course, she insists to herself that she's not spoiling him. After all, she reasons, these little excursions are purely educational. Arthur's insatiable curiosity deserves to be nurtured. The fact that she can bring home freshly gathered ingredients each day is simply a happy bonus. Watching her son grow so quickly, Alice often finds herself wondering what sort of man he'll become someday. With Reynolds as his father, she's certain he'll show interest in adventuring, though that thought alone makes her worry. She can only hope he'll fare better than the countless naive youngsters chasing the dream of becoming grand adventurers. If only she could somehow stop his constant habit of sneaking into the study. She's even been tempted to move his crib into that very room, just to keep an eye on him. Though that's a matter she keeps postponing for another time, so far. This sums up everything Alice has learned about her son during these first 2 years of his life. One day, as little Arthur peers curiously through the window, he spots his father outside, apparently preparing to perform a spell. Reynolds shuts his eyes, centering his focus, and the weight of his concentration alone fills Arthur with excitement, eager to witness what kind of magic his father can truly perform. Suddenly, the small pebbles scattered across the ground begin to tremble and rise, floating upward as Reynolds reaches the height of his incantation. The debris levitates just a few meters above the earth, and Arthur's initial anticipation fades instantly into disappointment. Reynolds, however, looks immensely proud of himself. Arthur, still unimpressed, can't help thinking that 3 full minutes of effort just to lift a handful of stones barely off the ground seems absurd. Honestly, doing it by hand might have been quicker. Just then, Alice appears beside him at the window. When she follows his gaze outside, her expression quickly shifts to irritation upon noticing her husband has managed to ruin the front yard once again. Up until now, Arthur has discovered that his father is an augmenter, a revelation that only deepens his curiosity about his own potential. He can't help but wonder what he himself will become once his maniture finally awakens. After observing his father's training for some time, Arthur decides it's best to take a break. As he tries to climb down from the bench, he fumbles awkwardly and struggles to get off. His eyes droop slightly from concentrating too intensely, but Alice mistakes that look for drowsiness. Gently, she lifts him up, assuming it's time for her little boy's nap. Yet the poor child quickly brings his tiny hands together, pleading earnestly for permission to keep studying instead. The sheer innocence radiating from him is disarming. Leaving Alice helpless to refuse, she gives in to his determined request. Soon, Arthur is seated with a massive book open in front of him, one nearly larger than his whole body. Suddenly, a loud crashing sound echoes from outside. Worried her clumsy husband might have toppled another tree again, she rushes out to see what happened. That leaves Arthur alone, a golden chance to practice forming his maniture, you see. Aside from soaking up knowledge about the world around him, Arthur's greatest feat so far has been his steady progress in developing his maniture. Over the past 2 years, he has painstakingly gathered tens of thousands of tiny mana fragments within his body, drawing them together near his solar plexus. Arthur now fully understands why it usually takes until one's teenage years for a maniture to form naturally. The fragments move agonizingly slow toward the center, making the process exhausting for both mind and body. But the boy's tireless persistence has not been in vain. He's nearly finished, only one fragment remains, as soon as he places the final piece. A sudden explosion bursts from within the house. The entire home is blown apart in a single violent blast. Outside, Reynolds instinctively shields Alice, pulling her close to protect her from the burning heat and flying debris. When the dust finally clears, the horrified couple turns to see what's left of their home, nothing but wreckage. Alice is speechless, overcome by shock and fear as they dash toward the shattered remains to find their son. Reynolds frantically throws aside broken beams and rubble. But when his eyes finally land on Arthur, his panic turns into disbelief. And soon that disbelief shifts into utter amazement. There, floating calmly amidst the ruins, is their little boy, completely unharmed, surrounded by a soft, radiant aura of mana. Arthur looks perfectly composed as if the explosion never happened. After completing the formation of his maniture, the tiny prodigy gently lands on his feet. He can now clearly sense the new core pulsating within him. The feeling of possessing his very own maniture fills him with excitement. Even the trees outside seem greener and more alive to him now. But then realization dawns: his home is gone. He has no clue what or who could have caused the devastation. 5 years have passed since that fateful incident. During that time, while his mother has been teaching him reading and writing, Arthur has also learned the fundamentals of mana manipulation and augmentation. At first, since his body was too small, For sparring, their focus remained on simple body conditioning. But not long ago, his father decided it was finally time for Arthur to start practicing with the wooden sword he'd received on his 3rd birthday. Reynolds takes him outside for training, and as Arthur grips his small sword with determination, his father holds up a tree branch and instructs him to align his mana flow with his breathing. Just like your heart or lungs, your manticore is another organ, he explains patiently. Yet Arthur can't help thinking that such vague and abstract lessons won't exactly teach much to a 4-year-old kid. Still, Arthur takes his stance and begins the exchange. He trades a few lighthearted strikes with his father. Their sparring session stretches on for quite some time, with Reynolds clearly having the time of his life. Meanwhile, Arthur grows increasingly annoyed. The boy knows his father won't let him go unless he proves himself with something impressive. Left with no other choice, he gathers his resolve, channeling all his strength into a single swing that snaps the wooden branch his father was holding. After that decisive strike, he promptly declares his wish to return to his studies. Once our boy resumes his deep dive into magical theory, the narration reveals that in this world, a person's power is determined by the color of their manticore. Manticores begin as black, clouded with impurities such as blood and other natural substances within the body. As those impurities are gradually refined away, the core's hue shifts, growing brighter and more potent. The sequence moves through black, red, orange, yellow, silver, and finally white, with each lighter shade representing greater purity and strength. While Arthur is fully absorbed in his studies, his mother interrupts, calling him in for dinner. As the family gathers around the table, Arthur feels a twinge of irritation at how often his concentration gets disrupted. During the meal, Reynolds brings up the idea of finding a proper mentor to further nurture Arthur's growing talents. Alice instantly protests, insisting that he's only 4 years old, far too young for such training. Reynolds argues that their son's extraordinary grasp of mana manipulation shouldn't be stifled just because of his age. Alice remains firm, refusing to send her child away to some distant city. Her husband then reassures her, explaining that it's not just any city and that a trusted friend of his will personally look after Arthur. Arthur, however, tunes out most of their debate, already weary from their endless back and forth. Suddenly, they both turn toward him, seeking his opinion. His father asks if he'd like to go study under a real teacher in the big city. The boy can't help but feel bewildered. After all, what kind of parent asks something like that to a 4-year-old? Regardless, he decides to play along, putting on his best childlike act, as he softly asks whether his parents could simply come along with him. The room falls silent for a moment, and then laughter breaks out among them. It seems neither of his parents had even considered the simple idea of accompanying their own child. With that realization, Reynolds makes the final decision. They'll all head to Zyra City together. The long-awaited day of their departure arrives, and they're not traveling alone. A group of adventurers will be joining them on their journey. Reynolds greets one of the adventurers warmly and introduces Arthur to the team. The boy bows politely, thanking them sincerely for accompanying his family to Cyrus. The adventurer, amused and impressed by Arthur's manners, takes a liking to him right away. His name is Crench, an augmenter skilled with the spear. Next is Angela Rose, a conjurer specializing in wind magic, known for her striking figure and confident presence among the group. Then comes Deaton Walker, another conjurer, whose mastery lies in manipulating earth magic. There's also Jasmine Flameworth, an augmenter who wields twin daggers with finesse. Among the party, she's the quietest of them all, saying little as she silently moves toward the carriage prepared for their trip. Finally, there's Helen Shard, an augmenter famed for her magic archery. With introductions complete, Reynolds announces it's time to get moving. The group loads their belongings onto the carriages, securing everything for the road ahead. And thus, the journey begins. The moment has finally arrived for Arthur to step beyond the boundaries of his small village and venture out into the vast world that awaits him. Morning breaks at last, and with it, the monsters awaken once more. The adventurers swiftly deal with them, cutting down each threat before it can spread. Once the danger fades, they pitch their tents deep within the forest, preparing to rest for the night. As the flames crackle and light dances across their faces, everyone gathers around the bonfire, enjoying the warmth and company. Arthur, however, looks somewhat dispirited, burdened by the monotony of this endless journey. Helen Shard notices his mood, approaches quietly, and settles beside him. She's eager to learn more about this boy, especially after hearing his father endlessly boast of his son's brilliance as a magician throughout the trip. Meanwhile, Crunch's attention shifts toward the two chatting nearby, and a mischievous idea crosses his mind. He wants to see what Reynolds' kid is really made of. Without so much as a warning, he snatches the boy off the ground, and with a grin suggests a quick duel. Before he knows it, Arthur is standing across from Crench, ready to fight. Confused and unsure, he wonders if it's even appropriate to spar with an adventurer like this. His eyes dart helplessly toward his father, silently begging for an excuse to escape. But instead of stopping it, his father just flashes a broad grin and urges him to go for the win. Feeling utterly betrayed, Arthur can't believe his father is this useless in a serious moment. Left with no other choice, the boy steadies himself, drawing upon the memories and instincts of his previous life. With his small hands gripping the sword tightly, he lunges forward, charging straight at Crunch. Crunch stands his ground, focused and prepared, ready to evade the oncoming strike. But before he can even react, the boy disappears from sight. In an instant, he reappears right behind the man's back, catching him completely off guard. Arthur braces his small frame, channeling mana through his sword with precision. Without hesitation, he swings the blade at Crunch, swift and clean. Yet Crunch sidesteps the blow effortlessly, countering with a slash of his own. The boy ducks just in time, the wooden stick slicing through the air above his head. Using that split-second opening, he drives forward and slams into Crunch's ribs, knocking the burly man flat on his back. But Crunch isn't the type to stay down. He sweeps his leg in retaliation, aiming to trip the kid, but Arthur ducks again, narrowly dodging the strike. Though he avoided that attack, he's uncertain if he can withstand the next one that Crunch is already preparing. Sure enough, the moment Crunch's stick connects, the powerful hit sends Arthur flying through the air. He crashes a few feet away, his back throbbing in pain. Dirt and Walker both scold Crunch with a smack to the neck for going overboard against a child. Crunch, however, is dumbfounded by the sheer skill he just witnessed. He can't wrap his head around how Reynolds claims to have never trained his son. Yet as always, Reynolds insists that he truly hasn't taught the boy a single thing. Arthur's mother rushes over, casting a healing spell while scolding him for secretly learning combat techniques behind her back. Arthur brushes it off with a sheepish grin, saying he merely picked things up by observing his father and reading a few books. But Crunch remains doubtful. There's no way those moves came from just reading. He's convinced the kid has serious talent and is dying to learn those tricks himself. Eventually, Arthur breaks down the steps, explaining how to perform those agile maneuvers. The others try to imitate him, but every single one fails miserably. Days pass as their journey to Zara City continues. During that time, Arthur's birthday quietly comes and goes, and he's showered with gifts, not just for his birthday but also in gratitude for teaching them those impressive techniques. To his surprise, even the usually reserved Jasmine Flameworth offers him a present. Training continues with Adam, Helen, and his father, each making solid progress. Much to Arthur's astonishment, Jasmine has already managed to master a few of the techniques he demonstrated. Arthur still can't get over how fast Jasmine picked up his teachings, especially the intricate footwork he thought would take days to master. After enjoying a bit of fun near a beautiful waterfall, the group decides it's time to continue their journey onward. Eventually, their path leads them into a dry, lifeless wasteland, a harsh contrast to the vibrant forest they'd left behind. As they travel, the group keeps spirits high with casual laughter and teasing. They poke fun at Arthur's father, calling him a walking disaster magnet who somehow always manages to drag the whole team into chaos wherever they go. Meanwhile, Arthur tries to bury himself in his book, attempting to focus. But concentration is next to impossible. The source of his distraction, Jasmine Flameworth, she's been staring at him non-stop, and it's making him completely lose his composure. But before things can get any more awkward, the peaceful trek is suddenly interrupted. Bandits appear out of nowhere. Everyone quickly snaps into action, preparing for battle. The raiders unleash a flurry of arrows from the shadows. But Angela Rose summons a powerful gust of wind, halting most of the deadly barrage midair and scattering the rest harmlessly aside. The adventurers' demeanor shifts instantly. They radiate fierce, killing intent as each member draws their weapon, ready to meet the attackers head-on. Helen takes her position, bow in hand and arrow drawn. Yet seeing the sheer flood of enemies rushing over the hills, she knows one arrow won't make a difference this time. Dozens, no, hundreds of bandits close in from every direction, completely surrounding the party with no clear path of escape. And then out of the horde we finally see their leader, a revolting brute who looks every bit the scum he is. He snarls commands at his underlings, ordering them to spare the women and the boy, insisting that they must not be harmed. After all, damaged goods don't fetch a high price on the market. In that chilling moment, Arthur realizes this world isn't much different from the one he once knew. Crime, greed, and cruelty all exist here too. Even so, he steels himself for what's about to come. Clutching his dagger tightly, he readies his stance, fully alert. But before he can make a move, his mother pulls him close, wrapping him protectively in her arms. She whispers softly, assuring him that everything will be fine, that she's here with him. Another wave of arrows rains down upon them. But Deaton Walker responds instantly, summoning a sturdy wall of stone with his earth magic, shielding most of the group from harm. The reprieve doesn't last long, as the bandits close in fast from all directions, pushing hard against their defenses. A few stray arrows manage to slip through the cracks in the wall, flying straight toward Arthur and his mother. But Angela Rose once again intervenes, sweeping the air with her wind magic to deflect the incoming shots, saving them both. Then the bandit leader finally descends from the hill, stepping forward to personally confront the party. Helen Shard refuses to let him get anywhere near. She looses several arrows in rapid succession, taking down 2 of the thugs instantly, but the leader bats away her shots with terrifying ease. Meanwhile, Reynolds unleashes his full might, cutting down the bandits one after another in a whirlwind of strength and precision. With a single swift charge, he wipes out an entire cluster of them in a single motion. But amid the chaos, one sneaky thug creeps up behind him, ready to strike. Helen spots the danger just in time, her sharp eyes saving him from what could have been a deadly blow. And she lands a flawless shot, her arrow piercing straight through the ambusher's skull. The battle continues to rage fiercely across the field. In the midst of the chaos, Crench can be seen cutting loose as well. He's fighting at full power now. When a bulky thug tries to sneak up behind him, Crench immediately evades and counters. With a rapid barrage of lethal thrusts, Jasmine too fights with unrelenting ferocity, her twin daggers gleaming with each swing. She tears through the enemy ranks, slicing throats and gouging out eyes without a moment's hesitation. Suddenly, a deranged thug from the rear cracks his whip toward her. But in his clumsy frenzy, the weapon lashes into one of his own men, slicing through the poor fool's leg. The strike is fast and brutal. Jasmine barely manages to evade the deadly swing. Unfazed, the whip-wielding bastard reels back and cracks his weapon again, its velocity almost blurring from sheer speed. But Jasmine matches him step for step, her acrobatics dazzling as she twists, flips, and rolls through the incoming lashes. Though she dodges the most dangerous strikes, a few manage to graze her skin, leaving shallow but painful wounds. It's a stark reminder that even she has her limits. Meanwhile, Arthur watches her duel unfold, noting how heavily the range of that whip puts Jasmine at a disadvantage. He knows he has to find a way to help, but no matter how determined he feels, he's painfully aware that his small body can't match the strength of an adult augmenter. Suddenly, something slams hard into their carriage. To his horror, it's his father, battered and bleeding badly. It's obvious he's been overwhelmed by his opponent, and that opponent turns out to be none other than the bandit leader himself. Arthur urgently calls out to his mother, begging her to heal Reynolds right away. But Alice is paralyzed by fear, sobbing uncontrollably, unable to focus enough to use her magic. Despite his wounds, Reynolds forces a comforting smile, assuring her that his injuries aren't fatal and there's no need to panic. Then, gathering what strength he has left, he turns to his son, explaining that he can still hold off the enemy leader, but not while worrying about his family's safety. He orders Alice and Arthur to run back the way they came and not look back. But Arthur refuses, declaring that he's going to fight too. Reynolds can't help but smile, resting a proud hand on his son's head. He praises his courage, but reminds him of the greater duty at hand, to protect his mother and the unborn sibling she carries. Before Reynolds can continue, Arthur swears solemnly that he'll defend her with his life. His father nods firmly, telling him to move quickly. He warns that the enemy has 4 mages lending support in the battle. Unfortunately, the bandit leader overhears their plan and shouts for his men to seize the healer immediately. Without a moment's hesitation, Arthur grabs his mother's hand and starts running, pulling her away from the chaos. Suddenly, one of the bandits lunges toward them, but his advance is stopped cold by Crench, who intercepts him and locks him down in combat, giving mother and son the precious seconds they need to escape. Another archer lines up a sneaky shot aimed straight at the fleeing pair. But Arthur's instincts kick in. He senses the arrow whistling toward them. He swings his wooden sword to deflect it mid-air, yet the sheer force of the impact splits the blade clean in half. The bandit is stunned, wide-eyed that a mere child managed to block such a deadly shot. But before he can recover, an arrow suddenly drills straight through his skull, fired by Helen, who yells for Arthur to keep running. As Arthur dashes away with his mother, something odd catches his attention. He recalls Reynolds mentioning 4 enemy mages, yet he can only spot 3 of them. He quickly recounts them in his head. One is locked in battle with Crench, another is dueling Deaton Walker, and the third is locked in fierce combat with Jasmine. That's when Arthur finally spots the last mage, standing high on the hill, gathering a massive orb of concentrated mana between his palms. The bastard hurls the seething energy straight toward Arthur and his mother. In that instant, Arthur freezes, unsure of what to do. Even if he channels his mana to defend, there's no way his mother could dodge it in time. Then, in a split-second decision, he slams his small feet into the dirt, shoving his mother out of the blast's path with all his strength. Through the roaring haze of mana, he throws his dagger with breathtaking precision. The blade hits its mark, burying itself deep into the mage's leg. But the mana sphere detonates, brutally tearing into Arthur and flinging his tiny body toward the cliff's edge. As he tumbles downward, he manages to yank the mage along with him. The dagger was tethered by a mana string, allowing Arthur to drag the man down as he fell. But before they hit the bottom, the mage desperately grips the cliff's edge. The fragile rock gives way beneath the strain, and both of them plunge helplessly into the abyss below. Deodan Walker spots the boy falling, panic flooding his face. He desperately summons a gigantic hand of solid earth to catch him. But by the time it reaches out, it's already too late. Tears well in Arthur's eyes as he continues to plummet. What shatters his heart more than the fall itself is the thought that his dream, becoming a big brother, is slipping away forever. The scene shifts to a dim chamber belonging to an elderly man named Marlorn. Inside stands King Grey, Arthur's former self. He enters quietly to meet the old man face to face. Marlorn greets him with gratitude for including him on the royal council, yet confesses that despite the honor, he sometimes envies the kings who are celebrated and glorified after their victories. Eventually, Marlorn asks what brings King Grey here so suddenly, curious why a man of such stature would visit someone like him. Grey responds not with words but by placing a war medal on the table, his medal from the most recent triumph. The medal glints under the torchlight and, without another word, he turns to leave, announcing his retirement. In this world ravaged by low birth rates and dwindling resources, wars had evolved into duels and armies were replaced by monarchs. Grey was one of those monarchs, an emblem of power who fought to defend his realm. Yet his decision to step down wasn't driven by fatigue or defeat. He had never sought endless battles or empty fame. What truly hollowed him was the loneliness, the void left by the absence of people he could love. Once an orphan who had lost everyone dear to him, Grey's rebirth as Arthur offered a new beginning, but his heart still ached. He would trade everything in this second life just to return to Ashbur and see his loved ones one last time. Sometime later, Arthur slowly opens his eyes again. He has no idea where he is or why he's even alive. The sight of a mangled, grotesque corpse nearby makes him instantly gag. Lying beneath the vast, open sky drained of all strength, a single leaf drifts down from above and lands gently on his face. The touch stirs him, forcing his tired eyes to open wider. Nearby, he spots a water pouch and a small bag of food resting on the ground. With the last of his energy, he crawls toward them, clutching the provisions and devouring the contents desperately. Whatever they may be, he eats and drinks until his trembling body can move no more, ensuring he gulps down enough water to stay conscious. When the brief meal is over, he collapses once again onto the cold earth. Utterly drained, some time passes before his eyes flutter open once more. And this time he forces himself to rise, ready to face whatever awaits him next. Yet his weakened legs fail him, and he collapses once more onto the ground. Still, he refuses to surrender, forcing every remaining drop of strength through his trembling body. At last, with sheer determination, he manages to rise to his feet. The first thing he does is wrench the dagger from the mage's lifeless corpse. When his eyes lift from the body, he finally realizes just how impossibly high the cliff he fell from truly is. It's beyond belief that he survived such a deadly plunge. But there's no time to ponder on that miracle, so he begins trudging along his solitary road. Out of nowhere, a voice echoes in the distance, calling to him. His first thought is that the dead mage might somehow be trying to speak to him. The eerie possibility makes his heart skip a beat. The voice rings again, this time calmly inquiring about the state of his body. The poor boy, nervous and uncertain, gathers his courage and pokes at the mage's corpse just to make sure it isn't moving. But the disembodied voice promptly reassures him that the dead won't be rising again, so he needn't fear. Arthur exhales in relief, comforted by that unexpected statement. However, his guard swiftly returns, sharpened by caution. He questions the unknown voice, demanding to know if it was the one who saved him from that disastrous fall. Without hesitation, the voice confirms it was indeed his savior. But when Arthur presses to learn who it is, the voice only teases that he'll find out in due time. Arthur frowns at the cryptic tone, making it clear he doesn't believe a word of what he's hearing. Yet the voice calmly reminds him that it's the only being capable of returning him home from this strange place. The mention of home stirs his heart and floods his mind with memories of his parents. And of course, his unborn sibling growing within his mother's womb. He doesn't know whether they made it safely to Zyra or if they're even still alive. Overwhelmed by the questions swirling in his head, his pride quickly gives way to humility. He respectfully addresses the unseen presence as Mr. Voice, asking if it could kindly guide him out of this place. The voice laughs softly, amused by how fast this once-proud boy has learned to bow his head. It admits a certain fondness for Arthur's sharp tongue, but can't resist pointing out its irritation at being called Mr., when in truth it's a lady. Still pleased by his courtesy, the mysterious woman agrees to lead him. Moments later, Arthur's mind is struck by a sudden, dizzying rush. His vision expands, revealing the entirety of the world around him. Even distant lands come into view, far beyond the reach of his eyes. Through this strange revelation, Arthur begins his trek out of the forest. His wounds steadily mend, leaving behind only faint aches as the day stretches into afternoon. Yet his thoughts remain restless. What kind of magic did she use to save him? How did she know he was falling, and why him of all people? The deeper he searches for answers, the more riddles he uncovers. Suddenly, his ears catch the gentle murmur of running water. He clambers up a massive rock blocking his way, and without hesitation, dives straight into the river below. As he savors the cooling touch of the water, the mysterious woman's voice rings again, teasing him for being so carefree. She even mocks the size of his manhood, feigning disappointment at such a tiny weapon. Arthur flushes with embarrassment, scrambling to throw his clothes back on. Then he quietly resumes his journey. He makes sure to fill his water pouch, and eats enough to restore his strength. Judging from where he fell somewhere down the eastern mountain, he assumes he must be near the elven domain. Yet he notices none of the mist that's said to shroud Forest Elshire. His worries about venturing through the beast glades are eased when he realizes that only small creatures roam the area. Still, it puzzles him that not a single mana beast has appeared, especially in a region so dense with mana. He wishes he could stay to absorb some of that energy, but he knows lingering here isn't an option. Time is precious, and getting back to his parents matters far more. With his mother carrying a child, even the grief of losing him could put her and the baby at risk. And if they're still alive, he must return to them no matter what. After walking for what feels like hours, Arthur finally reaches the place where the mysterious woman resides. At first glance, he mistakes her form for a pile of oddly shaped stones in size and relief, believing he's finally found her. But the lady quickly corrects him, insisting she isn't some sentient heap of rocks, and tells him that if he truly wants to meet her, he'll need to enter the narrow crevice nearby. Without a moment's hesitation, Arthur steps into the tunnel glowing faintly with arcane light. He swallows both fear and doubt as he ventures deeper. Step by step, he pushes forward through the dim, eerie corridor. But midway through his cautious advance, his foot slips, and he plummets straight into a vast abyss. The chasm shimmers with a deep blue glow, brimming with arcane energy. He eventually slams hard against solid ground. The impact rattles his bones. His jaw throbs in pain, but even through the agony, Arthur forces himself upright. Yet barely a second after standing, he collapses again in exhaustion. Fear grips him tightly, freezing him in place. His panic spirals, eyes wide, mouth hanging open in sheer horror. The girl's voice echoes, teasing that he might want to close his mouth before a bug decides to crawl in. Then, without warning, she extends a colossal hand toward him. The gesture startles him, but she calmly explains that opening a dimensional rift strong enough to send him home will take time. Until then, she'll be his host. Arthur lowers his head in gratitude, thanking her sincerely. As he moves toward a cluster of glowing fruits nearby, their radiant surfaces shimmer so vividly that he can clearly see his somber reflection staring back at him. A wave of melancholy washes over him as the sight reminds him of meals once shared with his family. Lost in those memories, he's startled when the lady suddenly appears behind him. The unexpected fright causes him to accidentally crush the fruit in his hand, splattering its sweet juice across his face. He wipes it off and begins eating what's left of the fruit. And as he chews, Arthur decides it's finally time for this strange being to introduce herself. The woman complies, revealing her name, Sylvia. Arthur's fear of her monstrous form gradually subsides, and he starts asking all the questions that have haunted him since the fall. Where exactly was he? Why was she living here alone? Where did she come from? How did she get wounded? And most of all, why had she chosen to save him? Sylvia answers patiently, explaining that this place lies between the Beast Glades and the Forest of Elshire, a hidden zone untouched by outsiders. She's kept it secret by warding off anyone who gets too close. Not that many ever find their way here anyway. Which means Arthur is the very first human to step into her sanctuary. Now feeling more comfortable around her, Arthur tells her she can call him Art, just as his family always does. Sylvia admits she has countless enemies who covet something she possesses. As for why she saved Arthur, she hesitates. Perhaps it was compassion, or maybe just the loneliness of endless solitude. Even she isn't sure why she intervened that day. Arthur thanks her kindly and wishes her a peaceful night. Her revelation leaves him speechless, standing in quiet awe before the being who changed his fate. A wave of emotion floods over him, too powerful to contain. Knowing that his loved ones are safe brings tears streaming down his face. A relieved smile breaks through as he thanks Sylvia for delivering the news he'd longed for so desperately. As the days rolled on, Sylvia and Arthur spent countless hours talking about everything under the sun, whenever she wasn't working on stabilizing the portal. Those hours slowly melted into days, and those days into weeks. They ended up sharing nearly every waking moment together. Though Sylvia rarely spoke about her own past, Arthur gradually began to grasp the kind of person she truly was beneath that intimidating shell. After spending so much time with this armored, enigmatic lady, Arthur came to realize that Sylvia perfectly embodied the saying, "Don't judge a book by its cover." Despite her fearsome, almost monstrous appearance, she was gentle, patient, compassionate, and full of quiet warmth. Yet she could be stern when she needed to be, especially when correcting him. Speaking of her stricter side, Arthur recalls one uncomfortable memory, the time he confessed his hatred toward the bandits who had ambushed him and his family. The face of that vile gang leader remains carved into his memory. He knows he'll never truly find peace until he hunts that man down himself. Just then, Sylvia flicks him sharply on the forehead, sending him tumbling several feet back. He groans, rubbing the sore spot, but before he can complain, she acknowledges that he isn't entirely wrong. After all, those bandits truly deserved to die. That's also the reason she never saved the mage who plummeted with him that day. But she warns him sternly that allowing his heart to drown in vengeance and hatred would only destroy him from within. Instead, she urges him to walk forward proudly, to keep his eyes fixed ahead, free from the shackles of revenge. Misfortunes will come again, she says, but he must not let grief or fury consume his spirit. Her words strike deep, leaving Arthur lost in thought. He barely notices when Sylvia's voice gently snaps him out of his trance. As he resumes eating, he realizes she has something else she's been meaning to discuss. From her understanding, humans usually awaken their mana cores around 12 or 13 years old. So how could he already possess a fully formed core and handle mana better than most seasoned mages? Arthur grins proudly and declares that he's simply a natural-born genius. Sylvia smirks, amused, and tells him she has something valuable to teach him then. It's a technique, a method of meditating and absorbing mana even while moving, perhaps even during battle if mastered well enough. When she demonstrates the technique, Arthur watches in utter awe, his curiosity ignited beyond measure. To learn it, he must begin with small, repetitive, and seemingly meaningless motions, then gradually refine them over time. Yet her abstract explanation leaves Arthur scratching his head. So Sylvia elaborates, mana beasts develop this skill instinctively, but since humans awaken much later, their bodies struggle to multitask in such a way. Still, since Arthur's body doesn't follow normal rules, she believes with enough effort he can achieve it. Her words light a spark within him, and he promises to give his absolute best. While Sylvia busies herself with forming the rift, Arthur pours all his focus into practicing. But one wrong step sends him stumbling face first to the ground. To truly master this art, he must learn to fight fluidly, while maintaining a continuous inward flow of mana. Yet even after failing, his confidence remains unshaken. He keeps practicing relentlessly, swinging, moving, and drawing in mana again and again. Finally, he feels it click within him. He's mastered the rhythm, the breathing, the harmony of movement and energy. Overjoyed, he rushes to share his success with Sylvia. But when he turns to her, he realizes she's already drained, her strength nearly spent. The sight of her motionless form sends Arthur spiraling into panic. It's clear that her old wound has finally caught up with her. Blood seeps through her enormous frame, slowly pooling across the ground. Desperately, Arthur grasps her massive hand, pouring every bit of strength his small body can summon. With sheer willpower, he manages to turn her heavy body over. But the sight that greets him nearly breaks him. The wound is getting worse by the second. Thinking back, it dawns on him that all this time as she worked tirelessly on the portal, her injuries had been steadily worsening. The realization crushes him like a mountain. The thought that she endured all that pain just to create a way home for him, and that he hadn't noticed until now, tears him apart inside. All he can do is cling to her, sobbing uncontrollably, his tears soaking her fading body. He can't understand how anything could ever be all right when she's slipping away before his eyes. In that moment, Arthur weeps. He cries longer than he'd ever dare to admit. And for the first time, he cries not as the warrior he's become, but as the small, helpless child he appears to be. Yet no matter how much he cries, he can't stop blaming himself. She's giving up her life so he can return to his family. But Sylvia, even in her final moments, feels grateful. Because of Arthur, she'll finally be freed from this lonely, forsaken cave, and that alone gives her peace. Soon, her body begins to crumble into shimmering ash. As her black armor disintegrates, a pair of radiant white wings unfold in its place. Standing before him now is Sylvia, in her true form, more magnificent and genuine than ever before. Arthur never imagined Sylvia would turn out to be a dragon. She admits it herself, she is a dragon, or at least what humans would call one. However, she insists they can't waste any more time talking. She must use her true form to complete the portal, and now that her disguise is gone, her enemies will surely come for her. Before they part ways, she tells him there are a few final things she needs to say. She gifts him a radiant, rainbow-colored egg, along with several of her own feathers. She instructs him to keep the egg warm with them. They'll help conceal its mana signature before Arthur can even process it all. Sylvia suddenly presses her massive snout gently against him. In that instant, a strange reaction tears through his body. His clothes rip apart, and glowing patterns begin to trace themselves across his skin. Sylvia calmly assures him that in time, he'll come to understand everything. Having completed her part, Sylvia turns to open the portal. She doesn't have the strength to make it lead straight to his home, but it should take him close enough to reach human lands safely. She urges him to hurry and jump through before it's too late. Just as Arthur braces to leap, massive rocks begin to collapse from the cavern's ceiling. Sylvia swiftly spreads her great wings, shielding him from the deadly debris. The cause of the destruction soon steps forth, a figure whose features eerily mirror Sylvia's own. He speaks in a calm, regal tone, demanding Sylvia's surrender and the object she protects. If she complies, he promises to heal her wounds. Even Arthur can tell this creature looks almost identical to Sylvia's earlier humanoid form. Sylvia then releases a powerful spell that freezes time itself. The only ones able to move now are her and Arthur. She tells him there's something she must confess. She deliberately delayed the portal spell just to spend more time with him. She knows it was selfish, yet she has one last selfish wish, to hear him call her grandma just once. Arthur, stunned and confused, stares at her in disbelief. But with the world frozen around them, he pleads for her to come with him instead to escape together. Tears stream down Sylvia's face as she tells him she can't. Her time is over. Before Arthur can say another word, she thrusts him into the glowing portal with one final, bittersweet goodbye. As he spirals through the rift, his small frame is swallowed by its swirling light. Arthur calls out to her one final time, honoring her wish by addressing her tenderly as Grandma. His voice draws a serene smile to Sylvia's face, faint yet full of warmth. She whispers her thanks, and with that gentle farewell, their journey together reaches its end. Yet Arthur's story does not end there. He crashes down into a thick forest surrounded by shadows and towering trunks. Giant trees stretch endlessly above him, enclosing him in their vast stillness. His mind is consumed by thoughts of her, and his heart tightens with grief. The pain inside him burns with more than sorrow, it carries anger and helplessness, knowing deep down that he will never see her again. The truth of that loss presses down on him with a weight too heavy to bear. All he can do is scream into the silence. It's only natural, how could he not mourn her? For 4 long months, Sylvia had been an unshakable presence in his world. Her words, her lessons, her laughter, all of them now echo in his head, refusing to fade. Their time together had felt both brief and everlasting, like a dream suspended between moments. She had cherished him as if he were her own child, giving him the things he'd missed since his rebirth: affection, wisdom, and warmth. Yet even now, it appears that this parting is not truly the end. As he lies motionless, her voice suddenly reaches his ears once more. But it isn't her in the flesh, it's a message, one she engraved into his mind before they parted, leaving him a final trace of herself. Sylvia's recorded message begins, her tone calm yet heavy with purpose. She tells Arthur he is far from ready to learn the whole truth. After all, his body is still that of a boy barely over 4 years old, even though his maniture has already matured to the dark red stage. She goes on to reveal that she has bestowed upon him a final gift. A special will, unique and powerful. His growth as a mage will depend entirely on how he learns to master it. But Arthur cannot bring himself to feel grateful for that so-called blessing. Bitterness swells in him, a storm of sadness, guilt, and fury clouding every thought, almost as if she can feel his heart from afar. Sylvia, ever perceptive, seems to know exactly the turmoil raging within him, yet she reminds him that his family still awaits his return, and that his purpose in this life is far from over. Her final wish is that he lives freely to savor the innocence of his youth, and someday become a man worthy of pride for both her and his parents. Her words end with a promise. When his maniture surpasses the white stage, he will hear her voice once again, and then she will unveil the truth she withheld. Until that moment comes, she bids farewell to King Grey. The sound of that name, his former title, jolts Arthur like a thunderclap. He stands frozen, unable to move. His mind clouds with utter confusion. The question that gnaws at him is how long she's known about who he truly is, and how she ever came to know of him at all. For now, he shoves those thoughts aside, forcing himself to deal with the present. He realizes that if he spends this entire life chasing vengeance, he'll only be repeating the tragedy of his past existence. So this time, he must live forward. But first, he needs to figure out where in the world is he. He quickly activates his mana absorption technique and darts ahead, through the forest at a speed that borders on divine. After sprinting for a while, Arthur notices that even with mana flowing through him, his sight remains limited, shrouded by the forest shadows. Yet one fact becomes clear: he's somewhere deep inside the Elshire forest. Though his grasp of the mana rotation Sylvia taught him is still unstable, he can now sustain his magic for far longer than before. However, after wandering endlessly, no sign of an exit greets him. Sylvia had assured him he would appear near human settlements, but up to this point, there hasn't been a single trace of another soul. After leaping from tree to tree for what feels like eternity, Arthur starts to feel like a monkey who's perfected the art of forest travel. Suddenly, he catches the faint presence of another human nearby. Instinctively, he leaps from tree to tree until he spots a cave nestled below. The strange fragments of noise and words drift in his mind like static, nonsensical echoes that fade away as he focuses on what truly matters. Using his agile movements, he lowers himself carefully. From a concealed distance, He strains his ears to listen in on the group ahead, trying to discern their intentions. Judging by their behavior, these wretched men are anything but decent. They've captured a young woman, and to his disgust, she's an elf. Her youthful, untainted appearance has already turned their greed into vile fantasies of profit. But the fierce glare on Arthur's face leaves no room for doubt. These scum will not be walking away alive. They can forget about lining their pockets with the elf's misery. Arthur isn't sure how these lowlifes even managed to tame forest hounds, but he knows that claiming one for himself might be his only way out of this place. And as for the slave traders themselves, he intends to use them as living targets to vent the storm inside him. As much as he wants to return home, Arthur knows he needs a calculated approach. Taking out the slave traders first is the smartest move, but charging all four head-on would be nothing short of suicide, so he opts for patience instead. Silently, he trails behind them, waiting. Every breath, every sound becomes part of his rhythm, as he builds up for the perfect strike when their guard drops. When night finally cloaks the forest, the moment arrives. Arthur begins by tossing a small nut against a nearby tree, instantly setting the hounds into a frenzy. One of the men curses and tells his partner to quiet the dogs before they draw in predators from the woods. As that man busies himself with the beasts, Arthur seizes his opening. He bursts forth, materializing right in front of the unsuspecting brute. In one swift motion, his mana-charged hand slashes across the man's throat, severing life in a single clean cut. With the first target down, Arthur wastes no time scavenging the corpse, retrieving a sturdy dagger from the man's belt as his new weapon. Meanwhile, the other bulky trader, the one who sent his companion to handle the dogs, grows uneasy as the silence drags on. He decides to investigate, stepping cautiously toward the soundless clearing, only for Arthur to ambush him without warning. The boy moves like a shadow, striking twice before the man even realizes it. His blow lands clean, opening the man's throat just as effortlessly as the first. Two are gone, but Arthur's body begins to falter from exhaustion. And just then, chaos erupts. The elf girl trapped inside the carriage starts to cry out, the exact outcome he dreaded. The remaining two slavers scramble out in alarm, leaving their temporary comfort behind. They scan the area, searching for their missing partners. Arthur keeps still, hiding behind the carriage's shadow. But one of them senses something amiss and lunges at him. Arthur barely manages to deflect the strike, retaliating in kind, his blade flashing as he cuts the man's legs clean off. A sharp, blood-curdling scream rips through the quiet night. The dying man's scream immediately draws the attention of his companion, who had been scouring the opposite side of the woods. He dashes back, only to find his bald comrade sprawled on the ground, bleeding out and barely clinging to life. The wounded man croaks out a warning, telling him to be careful, because the brat they're facing is a mage. The mention of a mage sparks a wicked curiosity in the long-haired bandit. Grinning, he tosses his sword aside, preferring to fight bare-handed. Clearly, he doesn't want to damage what he now considers his next prize. In his mind, this boy might sell for an even higher price than the elf if kept intact. With that greedy thought fueling him, he charges forward. Arthur leaps back just in time to evade the attack. He swiftly regains his footing and counters by hurling a rock straight into the bastard's face. The impact cracks against the man's jaw, drawing blood from his mouth. Seeing his moment, Arthur follows up by launching a mana-infused dagger at his target. But the bandit reacts fast, snatching the blade right out of the air. Instead of fear, excitement glimmers in his eyes. The fact that a child could pull this off only makes him more intrigued, convinced this brat is full of dangerous surprises. The bandit then pivots and unleashes a powerful kick, slamming into him with crushing force, enough to rattle his small frame and send him flying to the ground. For a moment, Arthur lies there breathless, stunned, and utterly defenseless. The bandit wastes no time, grabbing the boy roughly and hauling him up. But Arthur is not one to surrender quietly. He grips the man's wrist and channels mana into his palm, condensing it until it trembles with volatile energy. In a single heartbeat, the technique erupts into a small explosion that leaves the man's hand charred and useless. The slaver howls in agony, clutching his scorched flesh, and Arthur sees his chance. Without hesitation, he lets his dagger fly, slitting the man's throat and ending his life instantly. Now only the bald one remains, writhing helplessly on the ground, begging for mercy as his severed legs render him immobile. But Arthur long ago discarded the notion of mercy for filth like this. So without a word, he finishes what he started, making sure none of them leave this forest alive. Once the scum are dealt with, he turns toward the trembling elf girl. Her first instinct upon seeing him is to recoil in fear. Arthur softens his tone, speaking gently to calm her, offering comforting words to melt away her terror. Gradually she relaxes, her breathing steadier. Arthur then unties the cloth gag covering her mouth. Now that she's safe, he decides it's time to move on his own path. But the thought of being left alone terrifies her. She clings to him desperately, her big, pleading eyes glistening. Arthur sighs and tries to reason with her. He's already taken care of the bad men, so there's no danger of them coming after her again. Besides, he points out, elves are generally safe in this forest. But the little girl quickly shakes her head. She insists, repeating what her parents told her, that wild beasts fear only adults, and that children like her would be devoured by hounds or golem trees if left alone. The idea of becoming a babysitter doesn't sit well with Arthur at all, but realizing he has little choice, he reluctantly asks how far her home is. To his surprise, she answers nonchalantly that she doesn't know. Arthur exhales heavily and starts walking away, assuring her that he's only going to gather some supplies for their journey. Though he salvages whatever he can find, he knows neither of them can tell how long the road ahead will be. He also laments that they can't make use of the carriage. It would have made the trip much faster, but it's far too conspicuous to travel with. Still, he looks forward to finding the elves, hoping they might possess a way to send him back to the human kingdom. During his search for supplies, he comes across some clothes inside the wrecked carriage and hands them to the young elf. He tells her gently to put on the cloak, since the night air will soon grow cold. The little elf beams at his kindness, and Arthur responds with a gentle pat on her head. With that simple gesture, their journey truly begins. Together, they prepare to set off toward what they hope will lead them home. Following the vague direction she points out, they begin walking through the endless stretch of trees. Along the way, Arthur gradually learns more about the young elf. Her name is Tesha Aerolith, a child who had been separated from her family and left wandering the forest alone. Curious, she asks if he comes from the human kingdom. Every time she recalls the human realm, the only things that come to mind are rumors that all human men are shameless perverts who keep multiple wives. Their journey continues with lighthearted teasing and playful back-and-forth banter, easing the tension of their travels. As the sky darkens, they make camp deep within the forest. Arthur volunteers to stay awake and keep watch, urging Tesha to get some rest. Once Tesha Aerolith settles inside the tent for a well-earned sleep, Arthur sits alone beneath the blanket of brilliant stars. As he reflects quietly, it becomes clear that he had planned to spend his time deciphering the nature of the will Sylvia left him. But now, that mystery must wait until he safely escorts the elf girl home. A moment later, the girl peeks out from the tent and suggests, perhaps he should rest as well. She admits that though her grandmother forbade her from sharing her bed with boys, she'll make an exception just this once. Arthur simply replies that he isn't tired. Before heading back inside, the girl warns him that beasts are more likely to appear if they sense him standing guard outside. So she insists he stay inside the tent. It would be safer for both of them that way. Eventually, Arthur gives in to her persistence. The two of them end up sharing the same bedding, quietly drifting off to sleep. Dawn breaks once again. After a well-deserved rest, they resume their trek through the wilderness. The forest grows stranger the farther they go, and time passes with no clear sense of progress except the changing light above them. Arthur admits to himself that the constant worry about his family and his impatience to return has been weighing heavily on his mood. Yet what truly makes the journey unbearable are the sudden stabbing pains that erupt from his manicure without warning. The agony has grown worse, to the point where it plagues him every single day. Each morning he wakes, only to be struck again by waves of random, searing pain. One day, as they continue through the woods, they begin to notice movement, a pack of wild wolves tailing them from a distance. Without even looking back, Arthur throws his dagger, embedding it into a tree right beside a wolf's head. The startled beasts yelp and scatter, spooked beyond measure. As Tesha points excitedly toward a path up ahead, Arthur suddenly feels another burst of torment rip through his chest. He quickly hides behind a tree so Tesha won't see him in such a miserable state. Afraid she'll only grow worried if she does. Night falls once more. They camp again beneath the dense canopy, and just like that, another day dawns. Time flows strangely, but Tesha begins to recognize more and more of their surroundings, a hopeful sign at last. However, their pace begins to falter. Tesha's small body struggles to endure the exhaustion of constant travel. To ease her burden, Arthur takes her belongings and carries them himself. Still, he isn't having an easy time either. Even with mana reinforcing his body, the pain keeps worsening, and it's becoming harder to conceal it from the worried elf. Another night descends and seamlessly fades into yet another day.